Welcome to IL SciComm. We started this event to celebrate all the great things that are happening in Illinois with the hopes that we can spread the joy and wonder of science. I'm Jesse Samine, a science content specialist, and we also have Crystal Clifton and Janine Shepard, both science content specialists. And we are the hosts of IL SciComm each month. Our team of content specialists is employed by the Center for Educational Initiatives at Illinois State University and partners with ISB to support teachers in Illinois with the implementation of the NJSS learning standards. A little housekeeping before we get started. If you have not already turned on your camera, please do so now because we want it to be a fully authentic conversation. We like to see your faces. And while we will be encouraging you to talk during our discussion, while our invited guests are talking, please put yourself on mute so that we don't have that background noise. When you have a question or idea to share, you can click on the microphone and unmute yourself. If there's background noise or feedback during the call, we're going to mute you. Please don't be offended if that happens. You can change the view to gallery view in your kind of upper right-hand corner instead of the speaker view so you can see everybody at the same time. Also, it's helpful to rename yourself so we know who you are. To do that, you just hover your mouse over your video and click on the three dots in the upper right-hand corner. We will have our invited guests talk, and then we will open it up for questions once they are done presenting their information. A disclaimer before we start, any discussions here is not an endorsement by ISB or ISU. We are only providing a platform to share your ideas and resources. Today we're going to turn things over to Barbara Hug, an associate professor from the University of Illinois, along with graduate students James Planey, Harrison Davis, and Danielle Cozzola, to discuss the Phenomenon Finder website, which is a tool funded by the Cook County Extension, as well as Illinois MSP grant and Pages project. So without further ado, they're going to talk about their tool.
Well, thank you for inviting us to talk to you all about our tool and to share with you what we are or have done so far. We're looking forward to getting feedback from you all. But before we actually introduce ourselves a little bit more and say who we are and where we're going with the presentation today, James Planey on the next slide has organized a Google Doc, really, where all of the resources that we'll be using and making reference to are located. So if you need or want to look at this information during the presentation, you can obviously click on the link and access it for your use either during the session or after the session. And then on the next slide, we have a short pre-survey. We were interested in trying to identify, where are people in thinking about using Phenomenon in your instruction at this point. And if you don't mind actually just going to this Google Forms and clicking on the different responses or clicking on the questions in order to answer the questions, we would also greatly appreciate that. And while you're doing that, what we thought we could actually do is just give you a brief introduction of who we actually are. So on the next slide, you'll find again our names and the name of our presentation today. But just briefly, as Jesse said, my name is Barbara Hug. I am a faculty member in the College of Education here at the University of Illinois. And through the work that has been supported by Cook County Extension, as well as the Pages project that we'll talk about briefly, and Primes, which was one of the recently funded Illinois State Math Science Partnership grants that just recently ended, we were able to develop this Phenomena Finder resource that we'll be sharing with you today. I'm going to let the other three introduce themselves briefly before we get into the presentation.
I guess I'll jump in because we didn't talk about what order we'd introduce ourselves in. But and if I see people have filled out the survey already, the links are in chat if you need them. I'm James Planey. I'm a former science teacher. I'm a graduate student now at the University of Illinois in Curriculum and Instruction. And the Phenomena Finder comes out of my interest in sort of this collaborative co-curriculum design, both as when I was a practicing teacher and now as a graduate student. My larger interests are in how to merge all of these new NGSS-aligned learning practices with the enhancements we get from various learning technologies. So I have more of a technology and education background. We're excited to show the tool off to you today. And I hope there's a lot of good questions and comments like Barbara mentioned. We would love feedback from you. It's taking shape. It's kind of in development now, but your feedback is always welcome. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Cozzola. I am about to graduate with my master's in curriculum and development. I have worked with Barbara since I started the program, which was January 2018. And since then, I've worked on the Phenomena Finder for the past year and a half, including the summers as well. This summer, we're planning to do a little bit more of curriculum development based on the Finder while using it to do things related to a chemistry and earth science unit. I just accepted a job in Rantoul as their chemistry teacher, so I'm excited for that, and I'm also excited to continue to work with the tool in my own teaching experience, but also to share it with people that I'll be working with as a team.
Okay, and I'm, can you mute yourself real quick?
I did. Oh,
no, like your volume. Yeah, there you go, okay. Sorry, we're in the same room. I'm Harrison Davis. I'm currently a master's student in the same program. This is in the Department of Education at University of Illinois. I'm a pre-licensure teacher, and my interests are in physics and physical science. So I got involved with this last fall. So I've been working on this tool for the fall semester and now this spring semester. And I'm working on the same project, this summer as Danielle with turning this into curriculum development into a chemistry and earth science unit. So I'm excited to see where this goes.
I think really quick before we get started, just taking a look at like where we are as a group. That little pre-assessment, pre-survey kind of asked you to sort of rate your general level of understanding and readiness to leverage phenomena. And Harrison's gonna help us have a discussion about what that actually means. It's, we know it's a loaded term. And it looks like in terms of current understanding of using phenomena in science instruction, we're rating from sort of weak to strong. It looks like everybody's putting themselves in a pretty strong position, which is good in terms of understanding and readiness. And I think that's good for us because we'll get some nice feedback from you in terms of how to make the tool even more useful and even more accessible to people who are also coming in with a beginning level of understanding there. And then also a little bit more diversity in where to actually look for resources. So that's definitely our wheelhouse here. And we have even additional stuff beyond just the Phenomena Finder today. So hopefully that's valuable for everybody. And then in terms of communicating it. So I'm glad we've got people who are confident communicators here about what phenomena-based instruction is, maybe some of the key aspects of it, because we need you to go out and kind of spread the word about this instructional practice and these tools and all the resources behind it. So thank you for filling that out. That's very helpful. And I think, Harrison, you're up next, correct?
Yep, okay, that's me. So first, if we could just talk about this in chat. We have a couple questions on screen. If you just want to type in your responses, what are phenomena? And how do you see the role phenomena, what role do phenomena play in your current instructional practice? How are you using them? If you just want to type answers to those in chat, they can be quick things.
Yeah, I don't know if the general workflow for the webinars too, this was something we just weren't sure about. If people just want to unmute themselves and kind of pitch into, I think that's okay as long as we don't step on each other's toes too much.
Yeah, there's only, what, 11 of us? I think that works as well. I love phenomena.
I wanted to get it started.
A puzzling event, okay. Give kids a why.
Oh, here we go.
Just trying to use NGSS or district. Phenomena are natural events, sometimes describe an unexpected result. Okay, those are awesome. Okay. And is anyone using phenomena currently in their instruction? Anchoring points that help guide and develop driving. Just starting. Oh, the ICA storylines. Okay, cool. Great. Okay. So I think working on developing some this summer. Yeah, to the storyline. Okay, great. So I think we're all on the same page with what phenomena are, and it seems like people are at a lot of different places for if they're using them or not. So we're hoping with this we can begin to show you a little bit how to incorporate phenomena more into your practice. You want to go to the next slide, James? Great. Okay, so it looks like on the pre-service thing, people have a pretty good idea of what phenomena-based teaching looks like, but we just want to touch on this again so we're all on the same page. So sort of contrasting traditional science versus phenomena-based units. In traditional science, you get given the question by the teacher and the students answer some given question, but with phenomena, you work with the students to co-develop questions, and you also develop investigations based on those questions. In traditional science units, you do an investigation based on things you already know, and you're just sort of stepping through the process. But with phenomena, the investigation is built on the question. So you're uncovering science ideas based on these questions you've developed and the investigations that come from those questions. And then finally, with scientific practices in traditional classes, the practices are more like themselves. You just are doing the practices to do the scientific method per se. But with phenomena, the practices are a process to help you develop solutions and answer questions that come up about these phenomena. You want to go to the next one, James? Cool. Okay, so just in general, when you put phenomena into your classroom, what does that mean? On the first level, you're designing for student agency. So that means when you use phenomena, students are more engaged and they're motivated and they're interested in uncovering why things happen. I saw a couple of you mention this, that like they're natural observations that you wonder about, or they give kids a why, things like that. They engage kids and help them ask questions to solve something. And this also gives kids a lot of ownership about like what they're learning and how they're learning it. And when you use phenomena, you also are really doing a lot of stuff with NGSS. You have to use all three dimensions, the DCIs, the concepts, and the practices, as well as consider like how you're teaching equitably. So the question we want to help you answer today is like, how do you start thinking about phenomena, and where do you go to find phenomena to start using in your instruction?
So I'm going to take over for the next couple of slides here. And what I actually want to do here is just really sort of give you a grounding, or maybe a little bit of a history of why we actually decided to develop a phenomena finder, and how we actually hope for it to actually be used as we move forward. So why a phenomena finder? So it actually wasn't something that we had initially just set out to develop, but what it came out of work that we had been doing on some other projects. As I mentioned earlier, we had a state MSP grant that we called Primes. I currently have a NIH Science Education Partnership Award called Pages. And in doing professional development with teachers from around the country on these different projects, what we're realized is that identifying phenomena that are productive phenomena to use in the classroom is difficult. It's hard. And not only is the identifying the phenomenon hard to figure out and to settle on, but actually then turning around and planning the instruction using the phenomenon can be challenging for teachers, be it teachers who are new to the teaching field or even experienced teachers, because in thinking about NGSS aligned instruction, it's really new for everyone. And so we really need to think about how we can support a broad range of teachers as we move forward. And so this was meant to be a resource. It's meant to be a resource to start thinking about how can we actually integrate phenomenon in productive ways in our teaching, regardless of the classroom and regardless of the type of teaching that we're actually using. And on the next slide, I believe. We can't claim to have had a new idea. We're just building on what other people have actually done on already. And we have listed here phenomena for NGSS, as well as the Project Phenomena site that people might be familiar with. And I want to give a shout out to the ISTA Phenomena page, which has listed a number of resources that they've gathered together. And all of these resources are listed on the resource page that we had at the start of our presentation. And I really want to encourage people to look at these resources as people begin using phenomenon or continue to use phenomena in their classroom. And James now has actually pulled up TJ McKenna's phenomena page just as a way of highlighting another resource that people can actually use. But what we've actually tried to do is slightly different. We've actually tried to build on the work that others have done and to really provide a database that provides some guidance for how to use phenomena in the classroom. And so I believe on the next page is just that. It describes what the tool actually is. It's meant to be a resource, but it's not about providing the phenomena to use in the classroom. It's meant to be an exemplar. It's meant to be something that a teacher or curriculum developer might use in planning and in thinking about things, but it is not meant to be the end-all be-all. It's just the beginnings. And that's really important to think about as people begin starting to use the resource. And we hope that people really use it as a launching point to go off and actually develop quality materials to use in their classroom.
And so I'm going to go into a little bit about the general elements that are in the Phenomena Finder. I mentioned that it is still in development, so you're entering it in a good spot in terms of being able to reflect on it and really help us improve it and move forward. But looking on these screen captures here, you can take a look. In terms of some of the functionality, like Barbara said, we have these other tools that provided some good inspiration and are good resources. And we wanted to be able to take some of those and synthesize how to explore phenomena and how to increase connections just a little bit more and explore them in different ways. And so you're going to get a chance to go through the Phenomena Finder itself in a little bit, but the broad overview of what you're going to be able to have access to, it's a web-based tool. When you enter it, you'll see here at the top, we've got the ability to search via keywords. You're going to be able to enter different content area filters that progressively narrow down the amount of phenomena that are on your screen at any one time. And you're also able to filter via a disciplinary core idea. If you click the little up-down arrow icon, it will expand an individual card. And you'll see that you get some additional context on the phenomena, some quick tags and the DCIs that are related to it based on sort of our work on connecting these phenomena. And then there'll be a link to explore even further. And that explore link will take you to what we're referring to as a supplemental page. And these are linked Google Docs that are, you know, constantly being updated and edited. I've said before, you know, there's always a chance when you go into one of these, you'll actually see someone working on it and adding to it, which is kind of cool. And these are really a launching point for taking that phenomena and making it your own and moving forward as you work with it. They include example student-driven questions, just prototypical questions that might be used in the phenomena, and then links to additional resources as you go through. And we found that these pages have been really helpful in guiding users of the site as they go through and get more context on a phenomena. In terms of where we are with our current amount of available phenomena, the phenomena finder itself, right now when you'll have a chance to go on the website, we have 265 phenomena resources or cards that you can search through. And looking a little bit just at the distribution of the work that we have done, you can see our breakdown here with the different subjects in terms of life science, physical science, earth and space, and engineering. This distribution does represent some phenomena are tagged with multiple content areas, and so this just is counting the total content areas, but we're trying to really make a concerted effort to make sure that we're showing a distributed representation of the content areas as we're going through and creating these and adding more to them. And before I jump into this video, I did want to show a quick exemplar workflow of the Phenomena Finder. And so you'll have links, you have a link in your document that will take you to sort of our Phenomena Finder landing page. And this page right now primarily contains the link to enter the Phenomena Finder. If you saw us or were at NSTA 2019, you can access some our additional resources there. And this site will then grow. There'll be more sort of structural materials around this, and this will be more of a functional landing page. But if we enter the Phenomena Finder, showing you, you can see this should look familiar based on the screenshot slides that I showed you. And so you're able to dive right in with the phenomena that are displayed on the screen. And in a second, I'll put up a link. You're able to access this via the desktop or on a mobile device. It's friendly on both. And so sort of a sample workflow, if I have an idea of where, I used to be a biology teacher, so I'm going to take a look at life science, and that's filtered it down to 153 phenomena. And then, if I'm just thinking in broad strokes, I'm thinking about something I would want to do related to sort of cells and cell structure. And you can see that, like, as I start searching for cells, it's actually searched, and we've got phenomena here on sickle cell disease. And so I can expand that. I can see a little bit more about the details of the phenomena, and then I can actually click on the supplemental page link, and that takes me into just what we were talking about. And in here, there's a lot of different resources. One of those resources is actually a video right here on a high school student with sickle cell. And Danielle's gonna dive in a second and talk about how she actually used this resource and applied it in her pre-service teaching. So Danielle, I'll get the video ready, but if you wanna jump in, go for it.
Hey, so like James said, I was able to use this specific phenomena in a unit that I did, actually for my ed TPA. So it's worth something now. That's great. But yeah, I used this in my co-taught bio class. So my kids were about 14, 15 years old, freshmen mainly. And I started off by showing them this video that I think was very relatable for them. It's about a high school student that actually has sickle cell anemia. So not only is it somebody that is in their actual age group, but also somebody that they may be able to identify with in other ways, whether it's being in the marching band or something like that. You'll see in the video kind of what all this student participates in the way of it being relatable. So I guess we can go ahead and play that, and then I will talk a little bit more about that afterward.
Music is life. My name is Shania. I am 16 years old. I live in Mason, Mississippi, and I have sickle cell disease.
Even if they don't have a chronic disease, it's hard to be a teenager. They really have to be on top of taking care of their sickle cell disease, in addition to being exposed to the regular world and daily activities of going to school, participating in a sport.
The first time I actually found out she had a disease was when we were at a contest, and I saw her get kind of weak, and we were marching off the field, and I saw her pass out.
She's always just like pushed herself, and she's just worked so hard.
Most of our teens, they don't want to be different. They don't want to have to stop and take breaks because it makes them look different or feel different. It is a chronic disease, and it is very vital to their care that they have a place that they can go that understands their disease.
So just a real quick comment. I know that James said before that he was thinking in terms of cell structure when he was looking for this specific phenomena, but I actually ended up using it for a protein synthesis type unit. So that just goes to show that the phenomena can be used for multiple types of units, and it's not just closed off to one specific DCI or one specific concept that you want to teach. I think if you hit the space bar, the other, there we go. So those were the two specific DCIs that we had thought that this would address, the structure and function, and then the organization for matter and energy flow in organisms. So those are just some ideas that we had, but obviously it would be open to how you wanted to use the phenomena. Just a little bit more about how I used the phenomena in my classroom. The second day, after showing them that video and having a general discussion about what they've heard about proteins and what protein means to them, that was kind of my introductory way of putting the protein synthesis into the lesson. There's a lot of misconceptions with that. I'm sure that if you guys know science, you're all aware. Like the fact that we have to eat proteins, but then our body still makes proteins. A lot of kids get confused with that. So like teaching them about like essential amino acids versus amino acids that our bodies can make on their own. We kind of went into that a little bit. And that was all really done through class discourse. And after that, I kind of gave them an investigation where I gave them an actual, basically the central dogma of how we go from DNA to RNA to amino acids and then eventually proteins. So they kind of had to look at that, and then they had to figure out like how many amino acids there were for every like strand, every sequence on the mRNA, and so forth and so forth. So eventually I wanted them to connect that there was something going wrong within the DNA to where that mRNA was taking that copy and making the hemoglobin inappropriately and causing this sickle cell disease. So they eventually got there, but after the investigation, I had them do a simulation with the actual practice of going from like DNA to mRNA to amino acids to protein with this kit that my school had available that I was student teaching at. And after that, we had some modeling. So I had the kids represent their own representation of what they thought it was for that central dogma. And then we also, like our guiding question throughout the whole time was, how does that hemoglobin protein end up being sickle cell shaped? So we talked more throughout that whole entire process about the sickle cells and what they look like versus the actual like normal red blood cells. My kids' favorite analogy was like one looks like a full moon and one looks like a half moon. So that was pretty cool to see that they were actually like making up their own relations to these shapes that I didn't think of, but they made sense to them. So that is pretty much all I have for explaining my lesson and how I used it. Does anybody like have any comments about how they originally saw the phenomena? Like I know I already mentioned that we could do structure and function. I talked about protein synthesis. Does anybody else have any ideas from how they could maybe use this? Oh, inheritance. I like that. That's good. Genetic mutations. Yeah, our class got a little bit into that, just because that is kind of, how that happens ultimately. But we didn't actually go like from DNA to that specific concept, actually. Great. So yeah, thank you for letting me share that experience with you guys, and I appreciate your participation. Evolutionary advantages. Yes. Awesome.
And
also,
I think
there was one more thing I wanted to add, and it was just on the tip of my tongue, and now I forgot because I was reading that. Oh, I'm sorry. So another cool conversation that came out of it, we talked about how it was more prevalent in African Americans, and I have a lot of African American students in the class I was in, so they were very, very interested, and they actually ended up wanting to know like why it was more common. So then we talked about like, the geography of where people are from and, Pangea and all that stuff. So it was a really cool connection to that. And we actually had like some side conversations about things like that. So it just goes to show that like the phenomena are just endless, and they just, they lead from one thing to the next to the next. And it's just a really great feeling when your class can do that.
And to just continue what Danielle was just saying there about the connections that that this particular phenomena had for her students, I think it's really important, and that's what's showing on this slide. I think it's really important to think about, what is the nature of the phenomenon that you are actually using. And this is a slide that we got just recently from Henry Suarez and Phil Bell, when they started talking more about, what makes a phenomenon relevant, and this idea that you actually have these different continuums for thinking about phenomena, and why you might actually choose a particular phenomenon over another one based on your own goals and based on who you're working with, and to understand that there is no such thing as a perfect phenomenon, and that there's always pluses and minuses. There's always trade-offs that you need to consider for identifying, for picking a particular phenomenon to use in your classroom. And they've identified these 4 different categories that are listed here on the slide on the left, that you can actually think about, sort of the cultural significance of a particular phenomenon. How does it connect to contemporary science, the societal relevance, as well as the everyday phenomenon that students might be used to seeing or can actually make connections to. And so using this type of lens, you can actually begin to evaluate and figure out what makes a good phenomena to use in your particular context and in your particular situation, and decide which you actually want to use or not use based on your context. On the next slide. I'm going to turn this back over now to James, who will describe sort of the next section of our presentation.
Yeah, so we've been talking about the tool a lot, so we want to give you a chance kind of while we're here with you on the meeting to do sort of a hybrid Q&A while you sort of also explore the tool. And just thinking, in working on this tool, we have to put on different hats as we work on designing this. We're kind of thinking about what's relevant for the teachers and what's useful for the people kind of engaging with the tool. And so we have these preconceptions going in of how we feel like it should be used. And so we always want to make sure we're getting feedback from the people who are really leveraging it in their instruction and making sure that kind of matches with what we're doing. And so looking at our sort of what we think the site might be used as, really just initially as the ability to kind of just browse and generate ideas, to have a phenomena brought up that maybe you wouldn't think of right away and start thinking about how those can fit into what you're doing. But like I showed, we've got those filters, and so we do want to be able to accommodate people who have a specific instructional area or set of disciplinary core ideas going in, and seeing if anything we've identified kind of reflects their set of priorities that they've got. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more at the end before we wrap up after questions, but also as a resource to build upon and to leverage other storyline and phenomena-based educational resources. So just another piece in the puzzle that kind of puts everything together. And so, like I said, there's a link to the Phenomena Finder itself that will take you to that landing page in the Google document. I did mention it's laptop, desktop, and also mobile friendly. So if you want to take your phone out and snap the QR code or put the link in, feel free to scroll through it on your iPad or your mobile device also. And I think like I said, what we kind of want to do is just take a little bit of time to look at the tool, but kind of we're here to engage with you. Please feel free to kind of jump in with your camera, microphone, or if you want to put questions in chat as you look through the tool. We are interested in getting as many perspective and as much feedback as possible. So when you are in the Phenomena Finder, if you scroll to the very bottom of the site, you'll see these icons for the clipboard and the light bulb. One is a general feedback form about your perceptions of the tool itself, and the other is a spot where you can actually engage with us and add a phenomena that you feel is missing or an idea that you've got. And really where we're at now is getting more feedback like that from educators and making the tool even more relevant to them as they work through it. So I think with that, if we want to open it up for questions, we've got a 1 or 2 slides just to wrap up at the very end with our little post assessment, but we want to give you time to ask us questions, any of us, and we're happy to kind of explain more or get your feedback on how things look to you.
James, could you put the link in the chat box?
Yeah, of course, yes. See, that's also my job. Thank you. You're keeping on top of things. There you are. Oops, that's privately to one person. Everyone. Here we go.
I know that one question that I hear frequently and have a hard time answering myself is, once you have this phenomenon in place, and we know that it's supposed to elicit student questions and from there drive instructions or instruction. So what's the next step? So I introduced, like you showed the sickle cell video. What's the next step to get those questions and make sure that they're the right questions, and then use, how are you using student ideas? If you can talk a little bit about that, I think it'd be helpful for a lot of people.
So I can take a stab at that, and then I can let the others jump in as well. And it'd be great to actually hear from other people's experiences, using it out in the classroom and both in their own practice, but then also in curriculum development that people maybe are doing as well. One of the tools that I have really come to appreciate and that I actually use a lot is actually off of the Next Gen Storylines website that Brian Reiser and his group have actually developed, where they actually go through and they actually have a structure of, trying to figure out what makes a productive phenomenon and how can you actually use it in the classroom. And there's sort of it seems like there's a sequence of things that you can actually do where you, engage the students in the phenomenon, however you're actually doing it, be it through a video like Danielle showed or through some other, hands-on activities or observations or whatever it actually might be. And then to actually get students to, think about questions that they might actually have about that particular phenomenon. Students might then also generate related phenomenon. What does this particular phenomenon actually get them thinking about? And then you might also from that begin to develop actually investigations that you actually want to develop or answer, or that you can, excuse me, that you can use to actually answer some of the questions that you've actually come up with. And somewhere in that whole mix, hopefully you've also begun to actually think about, what's actually going on in that particular phenomenon that you maybe used as a starting point, and developing, some initial models that you can then use as sort of the backbone to actually testing out some of your ideas in the investigations that you actually use. But Brian Reiser's group actually have some tools that they actually suggest that people use or offer up on their website for people to actually use that help sort of structure things, that people can actually then turn around and actually use. So that's how I've used it. And it would be great to hear, other people, how they actually use it. But to go back to something that, Jesse, that you also said, how do you actually know if it's going to be a good phenomenon? You don't. Actually, you don't know until you actually use it in a classroom, perhaps, or use it with a small group of students. And then you have to be willing to try it, and you also have to be willing to revise and start anew, because sometimes it will work and other times it won't. Other people? Any comments or ideas?
So I've worked on Storyline. I've been fortunate enough to work with the Next Gen Storylines group in their development. And so we have had some times where you go through and you pick a phenomenon that you think is going to be a really great anchoring phenomenon to do your whole unit. And then you dig into it a little bit more and you really get into the science in it, and you find out it's really not a good fit, which is kind of a heartbreak. But yeah, you have to kind of keep that open mind and not get so stuck on something that you're not willing to realize that if it's not going to work, that you need to find something else to work. And the other thing is not all phenomena need to be phenomenal. So that's something else to keep in mind too when you look at them.
Other people?
I can just speak a little bit. So, I've worked with some middle school teachers developing a phenomena-based unit. And I know one of the things that was really productive for us after struggling for a little while in terms of finding that balance between using a phenomena we felt would be productive versus alignment to the DCIs or learning goals that we wanted to achieve was really taking a little bit of a step back and thinking about sort of that final student product or where we wanted for students to be at the end. And as we started to think about, well, we wanted students to be able to connect, how changes in one part of an ecosystem affect changes in another, and how changes in populations can be linked to those changes in ecosystems. It kind of started to give us a little bit more of a foundation for thinking about where that phenomena was going to be productive. And we actually, in thinking about all the tasks and the final project that we wanted the students to do, kind of helped us get down to identifying heartworm as an excellent example. And so that's actually, our phenomena is actually a dog that has a mysterious cough, and that cough is due to heartworm, and the students kind of uncover that along the way. Heartworm has a mosquito vector. There's a lot of tie-ins to climate and ecosystems and relationships. And so having those ideas of where we wanted the students to be at the end, at the beginning, and then finding that phenomena, it was easier for us to kind of see that was going to fit and have a better chance at that being like a good productive approach to developing the unit.
I'm not sure. Oh,
my bad.
Sorry, Barbara. I'm not sure if everyone saw Joanna's comment, but she said that she liked the format of the document. When you click and explore the phenomena, that it's simple and compact. Did anybody else have any comments? I know that some of you were probably already looking at that while we were having a conversation, trying to, do two things at once, which is perfectly fine. But did anybody else want to add anything that they had gotten from either a first impression or just one of them they looked at specifically?
I know that one of the things that I think is going to be really helpful for people is the list of phenomenon-driven questions. Just opening up one, I see 15 or 20 different questions. I'd be interested to hear what the process is like to come up with all those questions that you posted.
Harrison, do you actually want to take a stab at that one?
Sure, I can. So when I do work on this, we come up with those phenomenon ideas, and then we start fleshing it out with a little description of what it is and the relevant DCIs, and those links at the bottom. And for the questions, it's I have a lot of fun doing those. I think that's the most fun part, and it's really easy because we have so many phenomenon ideas. I can pick ones that I don't know anything about. So a lot of the questions are my questions that I want to learn. And then those links at the bottom are things that I find while trying to Google answers to those questions or things related to those, that are resources for answering some of those questions that you can then use to develop a lesson with information from those links. So almost all of the questions are the people that work on that going, I have no idea how this thing works, and just seriously just looking at the phenomena as the students would, and yeah, exactly, putting on the student hat and just asking questions as if we were students.
One of the questions I get a lot from teachers is, or a pushback, I guess, is that they claim like that their students don't ask good questions. So we talk a lot, like what is your response to that? Like, how do you get good questions? I know what my response is, but I want to hear, what is your response to get those good questions, those content-driven questions from students?
So before I actually take a stab at that, can we actually hear from some of the people in the webinar who have used this in the classroom, and to hear from practicing teachers about how they're doing it?
I know in my experience, I have the opposite happen. I actually have students often think of questions that I didn't expect them to. And a lot of times they'll come up with better questions than I predicted that they would. So maybe it's my age level. I'm a 4th grade teacher, but I actually have the opposite experience. If you have a good phenomena, they are full of questions and going in all directions. And from there, we can categorize them and kind of come up with a plan of where we're going from there. But it's never been difficult to get good questions out of them.
I think a lot of times it's in the presentation. I find it's a little bit easier to get a lot of great questions if it's something they can relate to. So with the Next Gen storylines, with the Addie storyline, where they watch the 12-minute long video about a girl that ends up getting a MRSA infection, like that's something that could happen to them. And oftentimes a lot of them know somebody that's had MRSA. But sometimes with other ones that they may not have that personal connection with, sometimes you have to add a question and it's okay. Like, I was kind of wondering about this. And sometimes your wonderings will then spur on their wonderings. So that's kind of a trick if they're kind of stalling out for questions.
For me, the experience I have had is if students are having problems coming up with questions, I may either give them a very general one to start with, or I try and just help fine tune them with the the why, the how, the where questions. So if they ask a question that doesn't seem complete or isn't going to really delve into the topic, I try and say, well, why is that? Or how does that happen? Or where is that going? Or what is it doing? Or what's the result? And it tends to help them create a better question or a more interesting question, or something that they can actually learn something from, instead of something very generic or general.
So I think another way, another option of getting kids to ask questions is also making certain to bring in related phenomenon, so that it's not just restricted to the particular one that you've brought in and that you're trying to focus the kids' attention around. But if they then also start thinking about what's related, oftentimes that helps generate questions, and it sort of broadens things. So that's another way of actually getting questions on the board. I agree with the, you yourself, putting yourself as a learner amongst your students and beginning to ask questions is also one way to actually get it. So it's not you're not positioning yourself as a teacher and they're the students, but rather everyone is really an equal. And everyone is invested in asking the questions and getting things going. And the other thing I also think is that sometimes it takes time, based on where you are in the sort of K-12 spectrums. Kids are not at times, unfortunately, are not used to asking questions as part of their own learning process. And so, at the start of the year, creating the norm of, the classroom norm of where asking questions is, what you do when you come into the science classroom. And that is something that's expected of you. And over time, I think students, warm up to and begin actually having fun. I mean, Harrison is absolutely right. These are the questions that, we're wondering about. And so getting the students to wonder about it as well is something that we really want to do. Go ahead, Danielle.
Thanks. So, like Barbara just mentioned, having that expectation for kids to ask questions in your classroom is really important. I went through that experience as a student teacher, and a lot of my anatomy kids, I taught an anatomy and physiology section as well, and they would just ask me random questions that didn't really have to do with the material from that day. Which at first kind of put me off, and I was like, well, hold on, like we need to get through this today. But then as I more so had some conversations with my cooperating teacher and started to realize how fruitful those conversations could be, I just engaged them in these questions because these were questions that they were asking that they wanted to know about. So they actually got that experience of being in control of what they were learning based on that specific topic. I know that sometimes you have to be careful because kids will try to, get you talking about something else. But I could tell when they were, really engaged and wanted to know these questions. So we would talk about them. And if it was a question that I didn't know, we would look it up and we would, kind of do that research aspect together too, which was a really cool experience.
So one thing, though, that I want to return to is that, Harrison alluded to the fact that when we were developing these resources pages, or the resource pages, excuse me, that are in the phenomena finder is that oftentimes the links that you'll see of other websites, other, videos, you name it, that can be used in trying to figure out answers to the questions or to possible questions that students would be asking. It's really important to remember that these are just the starting points. It's not meant to be, find the answer and move on to the next one, but rather these are meant to be resources that will help teachers and or other curriculum designers figure out ways of actually structuring instructional sequences that actually get at, that provide an opportunity for students to actually figure out the answer. And so remembering to position things in that stance, I think, is really important to think about.
We're almost out of time, and I want to thank you so much for joining us. I think that this is a really exciting tool that people are going to be able to use, and I'm so glad you took the time to share it with us, and I'm looking forward to looking into it more. Is there anything else anyone wanted to add before we finish up?
Barbara's gesturing, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I just wanted to actually mention this page that James moved the presentation to. STEM Teaching Tools is a website that's absolutely amazing for people to actually use to think about pedagogical shifts as we move to adopt the new standards. The resources that they have there are really impressive. And then, as has been referenced several times throughout the session, is the Next Gen Storylines website. They too have posted a number of different curriculum units that are aligned to the next generation science standards that use phenomena-based instruction, and they're good resources to go to. And there's many other resources out there, but those are two sort of central ones I think are important to actually look at. And then on the next slide, I believe, we do have, this is the second sort of post assessment. So Jeannie just posted one in the Google chat. And this one here was just something that we had come up with. And so if you don't mind filling out two, we would greatly appreciate it. And then on the next slide, I think, this is a shameless plug for continuing to think about three-dimensional instruction and using storylines. If you're interested in learning more about specific storylines, I actually have a project that's done in collaboration with the Next Gen Storyline website people, or Next Gen Storyline people, Brian Reiser and Michael Novak, Don Novak, a bunch of other people. And if you're interested in it, on this website, there's some information that you can find. Shameless plug.
Thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. And I, again, think there's so many good things that people will be able to get from this. Would really appreciate anyone taking either of those post surveys that are listed there. And if you're not currently on the Science listserv, we're going to put the link also in the chat there for you to join so that we can inform you when we have the next events coming up and with more resources that will hopefully be helpful. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.